Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snider. I've got Keith Roberts on the line. He's going to be my producer tonight, and the guest this evening is Frosty Wooldridge. He has a fantastic book called America on the Brink, and I'd like to welcome Frosty back to the show. Frosty, how are you this evening?
Thank you very much, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm doing very well. We're out here at 8,000 feet high in the Rocky Mountains. And winter is upon us. And of course, I traded my bicycle for skis. And so all is well in the world here at this time. And I wish everyone listening tonight a very Merry Christmas and certainly enjoy the festivities of the season.
We're going to take care of a little business first, Frosty. We've got a auction going on, and we're giving away a few gifts with donations. Isn't that true, Keith?
That is correct, sir, and thank you very much. The auction, go ahead to freedomslips.com, the homepage, and you'll see a great big banner right at the top. We do this every year. Last year was a great success. And with any donation over $25, you will get a free pocket knife. But be sure in the notes when you make a donation to give a mailing address so you can receive your gift.
And we are listener-supported radio, so please support us and support our guests so we can keep bringing you fantastic guests like Frosty Wooldridge. Frosty, so you guys are getting a little snow out there in Colorado, huh?
Yes, well, in the mountains, one of the things that I'm just about 30 minutes away from the Continental Divide, and the Continental Divide is literally the spine of the Rockies. And it rises to 14,000 feet in different places like Long's Peak. But most of it runs anywhere from 12 to 13,000 feet. So when the big moisture centers come over the Rockies, they drop their load of precipitation onto the Rocky Mountains. And the Continental Divide really catches anything that's left over from the other portions of the mountain range itself. Whether it's the San Juans or the Never Summer Range, you name it. I've climbed most of them. And of course, that's one of my great joys is to climb the 14,000 foot peaks here. And of course, about after November, they start catching all sorts of snow. There's about 7 or 8 feet in Vail right now. Winter Park, where I ski, has got around 6 feet of snow. So yeah, it's all happening here in the mountains.
Did you choose that particular location to live for any particular reason?
Yes, I like being in the mountains. I like being on a country road. I've got deer and elk that walk through the front yard weekly. I've got fox and coyote and lots of hummingbirds in the summertime. And I don't have to listen to sirens. I don't have any stoplights. And it's very peaceful in the woods. And I've got a small stream passing by. And so I like that tranquility. I'm a John Muir, Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Wallace Stegner, and Edward Abbey kind of guy, along with Jack London. So that's kind of where my passions lie.
I think it's very healthy for humans to live close to nature, don't you?
Absolutely. You know, one of the things I appreciate is the connection of body, mind, and spirit to the natural world. And one of the things that we're losing so rapidly in this country and around the world is that the cities have grown from, 2 million to 30 million. In fact, when I was over in Tokyo, in Japan, it's got about 35 million but you get big cities like Sao Paulo, I've been there, you get into Rio, and everyone's just living in these square boxes. They have no vibrational connections to the natural world. And so they start losing their sense of connection. As a matter of fact, I actually go on my bicycle trips in the summer and even into the winter. There's a big rock above our house at 9,000 feet, and I call it Meditation Rock. It's called grounding. And one of the things that many people can do is take their shoes off and stick their feet into the ground or into the grass or on a rock and recalibrate their or reharmonize their vibrations with the natural world. If you're in a city, you can do it by going out in the front yard, or you can go take a walk in the woods or whatever. But it's very, very important to keep your vibrations in sync or harmonized with the natural world. That kind of keeps your sanity, keeps your balance, keeps your sense of connection to the planet itself. So, yeah, that's why I like to be in the wilderness arena rather than on the hard concrete of, say, Denver, Colorado.
I live here in Ashport, Ohio, adjacent to the Dillon State Park. I think it's important to be able to walk into the forest as I did today. And I think that's part of the problem that is associated with overpopulation. And I grew up in the Cincinnati area, and as a younger adult, I remember as it was becoming more and more urban that I was just getting this feeling of dread all the time, and I really couldn't put my finger on it. But now I realize that it's because all of the natural areas were being destroyed and turned into shopping malls and expressways, and I think the trend is very unhealthy for us. And I think people are so lost now they don't even realize what it is that they don't know, that they're not experiencing on a daily basis. Can you comment on that, Frosty?
Well, as a matter of fact, that you're correct, and we're on the same wavelength here, Mark. And that is this: I read a book about 30 years ago called "Stalking the Wild Pendulum" by Itzhak Bentov, and in that book, he said Western humanity is quickly going crazy because it's leaving the farm. And I started on the farm. I'm a farm boy right out of it's a little town called Leroy, Michigan, north of Grand Rapids. And my parents there and my grandparents, and I used to drive the old John Deere tractor, the big green one, and cultivated corn and help the cows birth their calves and the chickens hatch. And my grandpa used to cut off the chicken's head to have, dinner and all that goes with that. And we'd have to pluck the feathers and slop the hogs and mow the hay and shovel all the cow manure and everything else that goes with it. And I really cherished that beginning of my life because it gave me a balance, and it gave me a tremendous appreciation for being a part of the natural world and touching it. And in this book, Bentov says, we're so wrapped up in 60 miles, 70 miles an hour and a piece of glass and steel rolling down the road at an unbelievable speed. We live in square apartments and houses with glass and steel and concrete, and we live in office buildings, and it takes away from our natural vibrations, the vibrations of our lives and the vibrations of the planet itself. He says everything vibrates, the wind, the water, fire, rock, air, the planet itself. And when you skewer that or cause it to be aberrant by living in a city, you don't get to touch a tree. You don't get to lean up against a tree. You don't get to smell the flowers. You don't get to go for a quiet walk. You hear a lot of sirens, and you hear a lot of noise and cars honking and all that goes with that. All those factors really funnel into this loss of your animalness, your humanity, your vibrations with nature, and he says in it, most people that are rich will go out for at least 2 days to the park or the lake or the ocean or whatever to recalibrate themselves and reharmonize with nature's vibrations. But the vast majority of city dwellers either drink themselves into oblivion, or they're biting their nails, or they go on a shopping spree, or they do watch TV. In fact, the average American watches 4.5 hours of TV 7 days a week. You can check that on the internet. Those figures are researched. And so can you imagine watching the boob tube 4.5 hours a day? If you're an average American, tell me what that's doing for your mind, your body, and your spirit. And of course, it's turning it into a slug, if you will. So that's pretty much. I've seen that, and I think John Muir said it. He said people need to go back to the wilderness, and their troubles will drop away like autumn leaves. and that the wilderness is the fountain of youth. And so I'm of the same way myself, and I'm right with you. Take that walk, stick your feet into the soil. It's called grounding or earthing, and let yourself regain the vibrations of the planet and of the natural world into you, and it will infuse you with energy, spirit, and really joy.
We're not really experiencing progress on this planet. We're experiencing urbanization, which I think is creating an aberration. I really think our society is now an aberration. And what I mean by that, it's something that's going down the wrong path or an abnormal path of evolution. Would you agree with that, Frosty?
You know, you and I must have been reading the same books or experiencing life very similarly. Because I've been watching it here for the last 45 years after my college career. And there's no question, we have morphed into a highly technical, high-speed society that's not dealing with human communication. It's not dealing with fellowship. It's not espousing the qualities of life that make life really joyful. And there's no question, when you look at the fact that millions upon millions are filling their Advil or their Aleve or certainly their different kinds of chemical, whatever. I think what is Valium is 1 million orders per week in this country. And then there's other, personality calming drugs that keep people from just being themselves. So, yes, if you look at the suicide rates, I lived here in Colorado the last 40 plus years, and when Columbine hit, everybody was just, oh, this is terrible, or that Sandy Hook killings that happened. Unfortunately, 18 teenagers kill themselves every day across this country, and nobody talks about it. And generally, when somebody kills themselves at the age of 18 or under, they're disconnected, they're very unhappy, they're afraid, and or they're simply lost to the point where nothing means anything to them, and especially themselves, and so they kill themselves. And so there is a Columbine essentially massacre every day in this country, and yet it's not dealt with, and so many people are lost that are in such living lives that are so frustrated or so just so out of control. And so I would agree with you. We have changed this society, one of fellowship and community, to one of steel and concrete, and folks don't relate to that. And one other thing I've learned, and I've had a computer since 1980 because I'm a writer, and it was a great thing to have a writer and then have somebody who could type up all my work. But nowadays the computers are pulling us faster than our biorhythms, and so we can't keep up with them. I understand that people text each other, teenagers text each other around 3,200 times a month. Instead of talking to each other or getting on the phone or having some kind of face-to-face, they text each other. And you can check that out, but I heard it on NPR, 3,200 or 3,300 times a month, these kids are texting each other. So there's obviously no communication going there. And you can't get warmth of a handshake or of arm over your shoulder from a friend, or even girls that hold hands or whatever. You can't get that from a cell phone. And you certainly don't get it from a TV. So I would say, yes, we have degenerated away from the fellowship of humanity and the communication that holds us together as a species.
I think what we're having is a kind of confusion and maliciousness, which is going all across the planet. I think we have a slowly approaching global collapse. I see people becoming more obtuse. It's harder for them to understand things. They're becoming indolent, too lazy to research. They're also becoming indifferent towards one another. I mean, it's almost offensive to say hello to someone. Sometimes people respond to that in a very negative way. And on the flip side, I think our leaders they're becoming megalomaniacal. They are taking away our rights of self-determination. And I think all of this in some strange way is related to this overpopulation scenario. Can you comment on that?
Well, thank you. And Mark, there's no question in my mind that the overpopulation issue facing not only America, but certainly the entire planet, and certainly bigger countries like Mexico that are overloaded and overpopulated, and China and India and Bangladesh, Indochina, these areas are certainly experiencing so many literally god-awful consequences, and that in the end, and I state this unequivocally, that human overpopulation will be the gravest and greatest issue of the 21st century for all of humanity, but not only all of humanity, but all of the natural world and all of the other species sharing this planet with us. And we have yet to admit that to ourselves. We have yet to even become aware of it or understand it, even in the face of the mega consequences that keep showing up, whether it's the 400 million roadkills that I talked about in the last hour with you the last time, and or the fact that we're about to lose 2.54 billion acres of land to this continued development because of the mass immigration into this country of 100 million more immigrants and a total of 138 million more people within the next 35 years. And so you're correct. When any organism grows beyond it's like we humans. If you're 150 to 170 or 80 pounds and you're 5'10" or 6 foot or whatever, you're pretty normal. But if you look at The Biggest Loser, it's a TV program that I've seen about twice, and it just made me so sick. I just felt so sorry for these people. But they're all 350, 400 pounds, men and women, and they just don't know how they got there. Mm-hmm. And so they're in this incredible clutches of this deadly overpopulation of their bodies as far as weight. And here we are as a civilization. We look out at China, we look out at India, we look out at Bangladesh, and we feel sorry for them. We look at the misery of Mexico and the poverty down there, and it's too bad for them. And yet we're on the same path. And so that's the tragedy. It's called, as I said before, cognitive dissonance. Mm-hmm. That's the intellectual denial of reality. And when you have that going on, and we have it going on in this country, but from the leader of this country all the way down to the governors, certainly the senators, all of the House reps, the corporation heads that expound, if you will, on exponential growth. We got to have growth. We got to have more jobs. They're pouring them into, as I said, California is growing by 1,655 people every single day of the year. And they celebrate that. They can't wait to have more of that. And so you're correct. We're just not aware of this, and yet we're becoming the victims. And as I said, we are becoming self-inflicted victims of our own destiny. And whether it's by design for those who don't understand what it's all about, or the rest of the American people who just aren't in touch with what is coming at them. And so, again, we're simply becoming victims. And along the way, you're getting to see this ancillary consequences of 18 teenagers killing themselves every day, and so many others driving drunk. And then, millions that go down the road texting, and they kill 3,000 people a year just from texting accidents. And then there's another 15,000 killed from alcohol-related accidents. And you can go right on down the line, and you just sit there and you go, this doesn't make any sense. And yet that's the consequence. Or you can take that 150 or 80-pound person and blow them up to a 350-pound person. What happens to that person? Well, they've got diabetes. They've got their cholesterol levels are off the charts, and so they're now moving toward a heart attack. They have all these consequences, And yet we're having the same consequences across this nation, metaphorically, and yet we continue not just a 350-pound biggest loser. The United States is on tap to add another 138 million more people, as if it's not going to, affect us. And you and I both know it's going to affect us.
Before we forget, why don't you mention your website, tell people about your website, and mention your book again, America on the Brink.
Yes, thank you. I wrote a book 2 years ago, and I hope to get on 60 Minutes, and I hope to get on Charlie Rose in front of Matt Lauer and bring this particular issue to the forefront. The book is America on the Brink, and the subtitle is America on the Brink, the next added 100 million Americans. And in that book, I start talking about water. We have 7 states right now who have water shortages and water issues. They're now going toilet to tap, which was just brought out on 60 Minutes with Leslie Stahl about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And not at one time did Leslie Stahl in that entire 15-minute gig talk about the fact that California, and that's where she was now, I used to live in San Diego when it was 15 million back in 64. And then now it's 38 million, and it's going to hit 58 million within the next 30 years. And she didn't make a whisper of that. And so I wrote her a letter at 60 Minutes, and I said, I'm ready to talk about the fact that you didn't talk about. California's water problems are never going to be solved by water, toilet to the tap, because you're going to be drowning in another 20 million more people. And of course, I haven't heard back from her, but I've written her 10 years ago. I've written her almost yearly. Let's talk about overpopulation. So somebody somewhere at higher points than I understand are actually censoring the debate, censoring the discussion, and only really wise persons like yourself will take someone like me on the show and bring this knowledge to your audience. And it's my goal is to create a consciousness shift in every listener listening to the Mark Snider Show, and then move that consciousness shift into the critical mass shift, which means you're taking action. And of course, I give you these websites that'll help you do that. And then tipping point, you move to a tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell, who's an outstanding writer, wrote that book. I read it cover to cover when it came out about 8-9 years ago. And we can actually change the course of history and change the thrust or the trajectory of our society by our actions. And you get those actions from the consciousness shift first, which you're getting tonight. If this is only your first time, you're probably going to get awakened like crazy. Secondly, you get a critical mass shift. There's enough of you who want to take action. And then finally, tipping point. And that's what I, is one of those outliers, if you will, am trying to do. And it's happened down through history. I don't care who your hero is, whether it's John Muir or Susan B. Anthony or Eleanor Roosevelt or whomever, Dr. Martin Luther King. Those are the ones that understood what was going on, and they took action, and then he got enough people that got behind them. And that's happened with George Washington and Abigail Adams and John Adams and certainly Ben Franklin way back then in 1775. So that's what we're doing tonight. Hopefully educating and inspiring and activating every person. And then you tell 10 and they tell 10. And then we start changing our civilization back toward a viable and sustainable civilization. So that's my mission statement. I'm actually going to continue this quest for the rest of my life. And because it's meaningful for me to pass on to future generations a viable and sustainable civilization.
One of the things people don't really realize is what you were saying about the lack of water. I want to talk about the Ogallala Aquifer, which is a shallow water table located beneath the Great Plains, one of the world's largest aquifers. It covers like 174,000 square miles. It's under South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Texas. And it's being depleted. I think the average depth used to be 240 feet. Today it's down to just 80 feet. Mm-hmm. So if I understand correctly, Frosty, that we will no longer be able to produce in those states anymore in terms of farming in the very near future because the water just won't be there, or it'll be too expensive to get. Is that correct?
That's correct. That massive lake, the Ogallala Aquifer, is actually going dry at an extraordinary rate of speed. We're drawing it down somewhere between 7 and 10 percentage points every year now because of the massive irrigation systems that are pulling out of it, but it only recharges around 2 to 3%. That's happening in aquifers in New Mexico, certainly in Arizona and in California right now. And so we are literally, as we grow our populations with this artificial watering and artificial gasoline, this energy source called gasoline, at some point both deplete. And then when both deplete or exhaust themselves, then we are sitting around with all of this population numbers. And for those of you who want the numbers, America hit 300 million in October of 2006. We are growing by 3.1 million per year. Well over 2/3 of that is being driven by legal immigration, not counting illegal, which is driving it another couple of percentage points. And with with population momentum, even though we have been having only 2 children per woman since 1970 on average, comes out to 3.1 million per year. We're on our way to jump from 300 million in 2006. We're 319 million right now. We will hit 438 million people here in America within the next 35 years. And for those of you listening for the first time, that equates to doubling the population of our 35 most populated cities in America. And to give you an example, New York City will jump from 8.3 million to 6.6 million. Chicago from around 5 million to 10 million. The state of Florida is projected to jump from 18 million in the year 2014 to 36 million by 2050, which means it's going to double. Texas is one of the 7 states that has water shortages right now, and they're going to jump from around 26 million to well over 36 million. And of course, the granddaddy of all will be California, will jump from its current 38 million to well over 58 million. And so, as you can see, every city has to be warmed and watered, and the people have to be transported, and they have to go to work. They have to have schools, they have to have medication and hospitals, and that's not going to be there for them. That thing called water and that thing called gasoline, and it's going to abruptly change the way we all live, if in fact we make it through the transformation, if you will, from a massively technical gasoline driven society to one that needs 50 million dirt farmers out there just to give us enough food so we can fill our stomachs so we can survive as a species. So yeah, we got some stuff coming at us.
Is this going to lead to a civil war, Frosty?
Well, as a matter of fact, let me have everyone appreciate this particular. I'm going to share with you a quote, and it's a powerful quote. I've used it before. I've even met some of the people who have made some of these quotes, and so you can take it into yourself and understand exactly what we're facing. And some of the top brains in the world keep asking these questions and making these statements. And here's 2 of them on energy, Mark, and I think you'll appreciate that. This is from James Howard Kunstler in the book The Long Emergency, which is a little more graphic than my book, America on the Brink. And he's a brilliant man. He says, and I quote, "The cheap oil age created an artificial bubble of plenitude for a period not much longer than a human lifetime. So I hazard to assert that as oil ceases to be cheap and the world reserves move toward depletion, which they will, we will be left with an enormous population that the ecology of the earth will not support. The journey back toward non-oil population homeostasis will not be pretty. We will discover the hard way that population hypergrowth was simply a side effect of the oil age. It was a condition, not a problem with a solution. That is what happened, and we are stuck with it, unquote. I got to tell you, that's a powerful, powerful statement by a man who did tremendous research. And here's another one by an energy expert himself called Walter Youngquist. And he said, and I'm quoting here, as we go from this happy hydrocarbon bubble, we have reached now to a renewable energy resource economy, which we will do this century, we must do. Will the civil part of civilization survive? As we both know, there is no way that alternative energy sources can supply the amount of per capita energy we now enjoy via gasoline, much less the 10 billion people expected on the planet by 2050. And the energy is what keeps this game going. We are involved in a Faustian bargain, selling our economic souls for the luxurious life of the moment, but sooner or later, the price has to be paid, unquote.
So our society is going to start to devolve or digress into a chaotic state if it hasn't started already.
That's correct. We're already seeing a lot of breakdown. When you start looking at 48 million Americans that are living or subsisting on food stamps, and then millions more on Section 8 housing, that means a lot of essentially the ants in the beehive are not working to make the whole beehive work, or the anthill. It doesn't make any difference. Use any metaphor you want. When you have 42 million Americans who are functionally illiterate, that means you've got a 1/6 essentially of the ant hive, as the ants aren't working to make the ant hive work. And then when you overload, let's just say the beehive, and you go out there and you poison all the flowers that the bees are operating to bring honey back to the hive, and you're having massive multiple beehive collapse. Well, you're seeing the same things happening to the human world right now. You're seeing wars for resources. These wars are for resources, and you're seeing breakdown in the environment. You're seeing the oceans warm up and become acidified. You're now seeing 100 species suffering extinction every day now. Every day. It's called the 6th extinction session. There have been 5 massive extinction sessions before the last one, which was the meteor that hit and caused a nuclear winter around the planet, which killed off around 97% of all life on the planet. And from that 3% that was left sprang what we have today in a 60 million year span. And so now the human race is causing this 6th extinction session. And at some point, when we take out, the grizzly bear and the bees and so forth, especially E.O. Wilson talked about, he's the Harvard biologist who's beyond brilliant. I'm reading one of his books right now. And it's on creation, and he won a Nobel Prize on it. But he said, if we lose the pollinators, then all life on Earth will come to a halt very quickly.
If people disagree about population, at least I believe everyone can see the side effects. They can see the traffic jams. They can see the extinction of the animals, the destruction of the forests, and things like that. I think it's just hard for people to see the underlying cause of this for some reason.
Again, that's that cognitive dissonance. The American people are so used to having everything their way. They've got all the gasoline they want. They don't realize that we buy 7 out of 10 barrels of gasoline now from other sources around the world. They don't realize that we are going to run out. That is a fact. That's not a myth. That's a fact. We are going to run out of gasoline. It is a non-renewable resource. Chris Clugston wrote a book called Scarcity. Will this be man's final blow? And he talks about the fact that we are now at almost the exhaustion of over 40 of the resources that the metals and the minerals that we use to run our cell phones and run our batteries and run our cars, and the steel and the bauxite and all that goes with that. And at some point when they're all gone, how do you run a society, especially when you just added 138 million people to America? Or let's go beyond that. Let's go from the 320 million we have right now and go to the 625 million projected within the next 80 years. At some point, something's got to give, whether it's the water or whether it's the metal or whether it's the minerals or whatever it is, or of course the environment itself starts breaking down faster. And this discussion is not being discussed. And it should be discussed in every diner, in every restaurant, in every schoolroom, in every college classroom. I've offered to give my program. I speak at colleges around the country, but I'm not getting enough interest to get out there and give this same speech. And I have a very powerful, very compelling speech that I give with a slideshow. And yet even colleges don't want to hear it because it's almost like if we don't talk about it, maybe it'll go away. But I'm here to tell you, folks, it's not going to go away. And in fact, as Mark is sharing with you, and I'm sure you've had other speakers on, this thing's going to get worse. and then it's going to get worse than that. And the reason I know that is because I've traveled through China and India and South America and Bangladesh and Indochina. I've been to all the places where it's come to fruition, and it's called the Human Misery Index. You simply start living in lower and lower quality of life and standard of living, and you start suffering the consequences of all the people that go crazy and start shooting up the place. There were 50 shootings, some 50 people over the 4th of July weekend in Chicago, this last 4th of July, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, and in a country that has choice to be, you could be the president of the United States from the poorest beginnings. Obviously, Barack Obama, approved that. And yet we got people killing each other for what? For what reason? Well, stress, compaction, petty turf wars, being illiterate, watching the TV and seeing all the rich people, and then you're looking at yourself and you're hopeless. You're pregnant at 12 or 13 or 14. You have no purpose in life. You have no education. Your illiteracy is killing you. You join a gang. You're doing drugs. So you're seeing, yes, we're getting lost in this giant miasma, if you will, of human population, where individual human beings, even here in America, don't find enough reason for living. They don't find enough reason for self-worth. And that all comes because there's just so many of us, and that we're so stressed, and we're trying to keep a job, and the parents aren't home. There's both parents are working, and the kids aren't getting parented. So yeah, you're looking at all of that combination. In fact, I was caught into tremendous traffic today on I-25 coming back from Colorado Springs, and yet Denver, Colorado is about to add 2.5 million more to the 2.5 million that are in Denver right now, and the state of Colorado is going to jump from 5.1 million to 10 million. And on the weekends already, I-70, it's a 90-mile gridlock traffic of bumper to bumper, stop and go, 1 to 3 miles an hour, and it ruins everybody's weekend. And I took pictures of it, in fact, and wrote about it this last spring. Memorial Day was from 9 in the morning till 10 at night, I-70, 2 and 3 lanes, starting out into 2 lanes, going west to Vail, was a 100-mile gridlock traffic parking lot.
But the way people would think about this today, Frosty, they wouldn't say it's an overpopulation problem. They wouldn't say there are too many cars. They would say we need to create more lanes on
That's what they say, too. Oh, we got to get more lanes on I-70. Right.
It wasn't there in 2010 this China National Highway traffic jam that lasted 10 days or something like that?
That's correct. I think it was close to 200 miles long. In fact, the largest traffic jam, gridlock traffic jam right now, I think it's now the honor goes to Sao Paulo in Brazil. But China has had these over 100-mile traffic jams, and they're quite normal now. They got to rush the helicopters in to feed the people and put in porta potties and everything else. And folks, I've been through China. I mean, it's got 1.3 billion. It's headed for 1.5 billion, and they are about. Just to give you an example, all of humanity today burns 84 million barrels of oil. And I think I gave this example. What is 84 million barrels of oil? 84 million barrels of oil, there are 42 gallons per drum of these oil drums, and they're 20 inches across. If you stick 84 million barrels side by side, it would create a belt that would circle the Earth at the equator 25,000 miles. Think of all that oil, all those barrels of oil, 20 inches in diameter, 84 million of them. Do the math. You'll have a belt of these oil drums that spreads, it circles the Earth at the equator, 25,000 mile long belt. And all that oil is added to those barrels at 12:01 a.m. every day, and it's burned up by 11:59 p.m. that night, 24 hours later. And that's why we're doing so much damage to the oceans as far as acidic content and carbon footprint, and imbalancing all of nature itself. Well, within the next 16 years, according to James Howard Kunstler in The Long Emergency, at the rate of over 27 million new cars put on the highways in China every year, net gain, ladies and gentlemen, that China will be burning 98 million barrels of oil per day by itself. 98 million barrels of oil. In other words, more oil will be burnt by those in China in the next 16 years actually, coming up here very quickly, by 2030, that they'll be out burning the rest of the world. And of course, by the time that happens, the world will have added another 2 billion people. So you can see, I'm painting a picture for you. It's very sobering. That's why I'm hoping that every person listening tonight understands the ramifications that are going to be facing their children within the next 20 to 30 years. Your children will be in this mess. And so that's why it's so important. And again, 3 of the websites I want to always bring out to you is CAPSWEB. It's an national website. It's run by Joanne Weidman. She's brilliant. And CAPS Web is Californians for Population Stabilization, but it's national, international, and be a part of it. Join it for free. Send in the faxes and make the phone calls. It shows you how to do it. Roy Beck, dear friend of mine, brilliant man. NumbersUSA.org, NUMBERS, USA.org. Make sure that everyone you know has seen the Gumbels, Poverty, and Immigration 5-minute video. Just download it and send it to all your friends. It shows you the futility of immigrating 1.2 million immigrants into our country every year, 100,000 every month, because the world adds another 80 million net gain per year. In fact, last year was 86 million. So there's no end to the line, and they're not taking care of their own fecundity rates. And so they just exhaust all of those into these first world countries, only to turn our country into the same thing they fled. And then finally, FAIR, FAIRUS.org. That's the Federation for American Immigration Reform. I'm a board of directors member. Dan Stein and Bob Dane and the whole crew there is doing everything they can do to stop this amnesty that's going to not only add that 1.2 million every year legally, they jumped it to 2 million legal immigrants every year in the Senate 744 bill, but also they gave amnesty to anywhere from 20 to God only knows how many million more. And then those people, once they gain civil citizenship, they can chain migrate up to 10 per family themselves. So you can see this thing's going to get really ugly and is going to get really nasty for not only you and me, the American citizens of this country, but also for the immigrants, because the sheer numbers alone are going to absolutely swamp and overwhelm our carrying capacity here in the United States.
Frosty, you're going to stay with us the next hour too, right?
Excellent. Yes, we'll go over some specifics.
Okay, I just wanted to double check. Now, even if we have these undetected large sources of oil, let's just assume they're out there.
Sure.
We don't realize that the oil in the ground, it has to serve some function. It must lubricate these tectonic plates or massive rocky shelves. We can't take all of that oil out of there without having a negative effect as well to the planet, correct?
That's correct. Realize this: when you're taking 84 million barrels of oil out of the ground, that's like creating a vacuum. If you create a vacuum here in the biosphere, something's going to fill that vacuum. That's absolutely an aspect of physics. Nature will always fill a vacuum, and so by draining billions and trillions of barrels of oil out of the Earth's underbelly, if you will, or her belly, then something's going to cave in, something's going to fill in, something's going to. It's the same thing going on in Florida right now. They're sucking. Pardon?
Sinkholes?
Yeah, sinkholes. Yeah, they're sucking all the water out of the ground down there in Florida, and because it's a sand-based, peninsula, it's just a giant sandbox all the way down to Key West. And I've traveled all over Florida, probably over 100 times. I've gone to Florida, and so you pull that water out of the ground, then something is you're going to create a vacuum under the ground, and something's going to happen, and so it's very, very strongly possible. Probable that the tectonic plates, everything that's being balanced on the planet, inside the planet, when you pull all of that liquid out of the planet, then nature's going to absolutely fill it in, do something, and whether it's the tectonic plates that are going to move, or it's going to cause giant tsunamis that are going to wash up. And please realize that so much of human life is right there on the shorelines around the planet. That's where most of humanity lives, is on the shorelines. And so you better believe it. We're going to pay a severe price at some point for our shenanigans around the planet.
Isn't it strange with all these tremendous problems that people still want to stand around and talk about the football game? It amazes me. I mean, how can they be so focused on things that have absolutely no relevance whatsoever?
Again, it's because the American people, when I attended school, K through 12, I studied hard. I had a paper out. I got involved. I learned. I studied my tail feathers off. I worked my way through college. I studied my tail feathers off. You go through Michigan State University or Ohio State University or any of the universities in this country, that you can say that they're party schools, but the fact is, if you don't study and pass your marks, you're not going to be partying at a party school. And one of the things about going to a university or learning more about your world, especially when you are somebody who cares, you're going to become broader in your depth. You're going to have greater breadth and depth. And unfortunately, this country has had such an easy ride, and most Americans have had such an easy ride, even the poor Americans in this country, that the educational standards of this country have gone down to Hispanic studies, communications for this, black studies, you name it, some of the, basket weaving, whatever. And so many that are gaining degrees don't have the aspects of critical thinking. There's a lack of in fact, there was a big thing that even it was at one of the big schools. I think it was at Notre Dame, Notre Dame or some other school. I'm not sure what the school was. It comes to mind, but South Carolina. It was South Carolina. South Carolina. They had courses given to all the football, basketball, and baseball players that never even met, and that some lady had the ability to give all A's on a 4 or 5 credit course, and it would just jump the grades for all of these these athletes that were playing to make the school a lot of money, but these kids weren't learning anything. And I can attest to that because the same thing happened when I was going to Michigan State University. Bubba Smith never went to class, and he played football. He could hit like a freight train, but he never went to class, and he sat in the grill all the time. And you always wondered. I studied my tail feathers off, and yet he made it through all 4 years of college. Well, he came out essentially functionally illiterate, but that's happening across the board. Detroit public schools right now, just as reported by Brian Williams, 74% dropout flunk-out rate. You've got millions of kids that are coming onto the streets functionally illiterate. As I said, 42 million are functionally illiterate. 50 million Americans can't read past the 4th grade level. That's 92 million people right there. So if you take enough of that average, and then the average American who cares more about the Broncos or the Cleveland Indians or the Cincinnati Reds or whatever, you've got a lot of people who simply only care about their immediate moment, and as long as they got a job and a pizza and a beer, they're pretty happy and life goes on. So that's why we're a nation not thinking about much of anything, and you see that reflection in the people we vote into Congress and the White House, actually.
Well, we've got about 1 minute until the break. You mentioned 74% dropout rate. Which school was that in?
That's in Detroit Public Schools, as reported by Brian Williams. Here in Denver, Colorado, we have around 55% dropout flunk-out rate, and as high as 67%. I actually have the paper that shows that number. And we have 172 different languages here in Denver Public Schools because of the massive immigration into the Denver Public School system, and as well all over the country. Over 100 languages out there in California. So education is not going on very well, and it's mostly a warehouse effect.
So that's going to lead to like the Ferguson, Missouri riots in other places, right? I mean, that's the logical result.
That is the logical result because this is a rule of law, and I studied the grand jury. 4 African American women and 2 African American men all corroborated the fact that young man, Michael Brown, actually tried to wrestle the gun away from the police officer, and in so doing got his hand shot. He then jumped out of the car after attacking the police officer and ran down the street, turned right around. The police officer said, "Stop," and he shouted, "Stop, stop, stop." And this was all corroborated by these African-American witnesses. And the kid charged right at the police officer. And the police officer is like 5'10", 180 pounds. This kid was 290 and 6'4". He instead of taking that verdict, they rioted. And they went against common sense and the reality of it all.
All right, Frosty, we'll be right back.
Okay.
Minute break. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snider. I love it on the break there when the emperor says there is no good or evil, there is only power. And sometimes it seems like we live in a world like that. Very short break, very sobering subject we're talking about tonight. Overpopulation, immigration, the destruction of the natural world. Maybe a future filled with chaos, a future filled with a civil war. We're discussing Frosty Wooldridge's book, America on the Brink, the next added 100 million Americans. Very sobering material. And Indeed. Keith, my producer, is going to tell us a little bit again about our auction and the other things we've got going on here at the station. Right, Keith?
Thank you, Mark. I'd be very happy to. Our annual holiday auction is going on through the 14th to give you time, if it's a gift, to send it to whoever you like. Just go to freedomsleuths.com and look at the very front page. It's right there at the top of the page. There's a big banner. And any donation of over $25, you will receive a free gift. Be sure to tell us where to send it to. So put in your address, your mailing address, and we'll get that right out to you.
And Keith, you should have Frosty on the other show you do. What is it, Major Tom or whatever?
Ground Control with Major Tom. Yes, Frosty, you're welcome to come on my show sometime. I don't have any openings till January. But I'll shoot you a text and Skype and give you the details on that if you'd like to come on.
I would love to. We can't, as the messengers, we cannot get to enough people fast enough. So I have dedicated my life to this issue that means whether our country survives this, our civilization survives this century or doesn't. And so being one who cares just as much as John Muir or Thomas Jefferson or Abigail Adams or Susan B. Anthony or Dr. Martin Luther King, I care about everyone and every person and every creature. And so I would be tickled and honored to come onto your show, because this is the discussion that needs to be brought to every American citizen so that we can take action intelligently to make a chance for our children and the future generations and all the other creatures that we share this planet with.
And
I totally agree, and that's why I'm doing this work also, to raise consciousness and awareness. I wanted to ask you, how did you get the name Frosty? Is that a nickname?
Yes, it is. I got it in sports as a kid. My given name is Forrest, Forrest. My father named me after his best friend in World War II, who pulled him out of a foxhole. So if the friend hadn't pulled him out of the foxhole, I wouldn't be here. So I'm pretty happy. However, I'm kind of a happy-go-lucky guy. I'm a pretty high-energy kind of guy. And Forrest never quite fit me. So as a teenager, a 13-year-old, in fact, it was a sports nickname, and I've just gone with that ever since. And it's pretty much my name, and that's what I call or answer to. My mom, who's 92, still calls me Forrest, but she's the only one.
Thank you for that.
All righty.
Frosty, can you tell us about Dr. Otis Graham?
Well, yes, I can. And let me just segue back, just a quick one. The race riots in Ferguson.
Yes. Yes.
Again, you're losing. When you lose the rule of law, and when high school kids are marching around going "F the police," the fact is, if we didn't have police, we would have total anarchy in this country. Total anarchy. We would be like Syria, and so, or Congo, or Sudan, or Somalia. So, if we lose the rule of law, we will lose our society. And as a matter of fact, the real tragedy, whether it's the Trayvon Martin Zimmerman killing, or this latest Michael Brown thing, or even the Garner Eric Garner situation, the thing is, you can't sit there and fight a police officer. When a police officer stops you for any kind of infraction, speeding or whatever, it's yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, or no, ma'am, or yes, sir. You don't sit there and argue with a police officer. And when they want you to get cuffed because they have a reason to take you downtown, go with getting cuffed and then do your day in court. But you don't fight a police officer because you're going to lose. And the tragedy, of course, is that between the time of Trayvon Martin and when he got the final verdict of Zimmerman a year later, I think the figures show that something like it was around 1,400 black on black killings. And not one Al Sharpton and not one Jesse Jackson and not one dignitary in the Black Caucus ever said a thing about it. And so when you see the kind of consequences that are going on in Ferguson and so forth, we have got to address education for African Americans, and I wrote a piece about it. You can go to newswithviews.com. It's called African Americans Self-Destructing in America, and Here's Why. And because I've worked in the inner city, I taught in the inner city, I talk with 95% African American children in the classes I taught. I have an understanding of what's going on. So we've got to get down into 73% of African American children are brought up by a single mother. In other words, these kids are all out of wedlock, and there's no father role, and no father provider. They're all living on welfare. When you have enough generations that disrespect themselves, disrespect their self-accountability, their personal responsibility, and their personal accountability, you've got socialism and a welfare state that breeds contempt, self-contempt, and all that goes with that. And that's what happens with a Ferguson. That's part of the whole Ferguson thing, or even the Eric Garner guy in New York City. Because one white boy was killed in South Carolina about a year, or I think 2 years ago. He was 18 years old. He came down the street. 3 black guys killed him right there on the street. Did all of the Caucasian Americans go into riots and raise heck? No, they let the courts take over. The kid was dead. The parents pressed and so forth to have this man put in jail, or all 3 of them. And all 3 of those black men, the African Americans who killed this, his name was Marley, I think, Marley. Look it up on the internet. And they're now sitting in jail for the next 50 years. So whether we're black or white or brown or yellow or red or whatever we are in this society, we must maintain the rule of law. And the other aspect of it is this, and I've seen it, and I think I mentioned it last time. The one thing that occurs in third world countries, and the lawlessness of Somalia, the lawlessness of even Mexico, the lawlessness of Sudan or Congo, and the rapes and the killings and all that goes with it, has to do with illiteracy. Illiteracy is the prime driver of poverty and the human misery index in the world. So we need to maintain the educational standards and get African Americans into schools, into trade schools, into jobs, into self-respect, into self-accountability and personal accountability if we're going to maintain a civil society. So I really wanted to make that clear, that that's also a part of the overpopulation issue, because so many people get so lost in the system that they just drop into the cracks and turn into gang members, or they're pregnant and they've got a kid that you and I've got to pay for. So you can see it all ties together.
Do you think sometimes, though, that the police now are using a little too much force in some of these cases?
Oh, no question. There's, I sit here and I think, why didn't he shoot him in the leg?
Right.
Why didn't
exactly.
he?
Yeah,
take his legs out. I guarantee you get a 357 in the femur. You're going to slow down real quick.
You're done. Right? Basically.
You're pretty much done. The 350-pound guy named Eric Garner, why didn't they just tase him?
Yeah.
I don't know those specifics, but I think the police better start doing a better job of how they approach and how they respond to individuals on the streets, and certainly with the race relations in this country at an extremely all-time low, since actually worse than when I was a kid in 1965. I think the race relations have really degenerated because of the illiteracy rates, because of the joblessness rates, because of the fatherless children rates, that we better get a hold of this one if we want to go forward, and we better be a little more sensitive as we go forward to criminals and crime and black-white crime and so forth and so on.
Do you think that the country is intentionally being brought down? I wonder if these international bankers now really have control of the government. And I think we're not really functioning under a constitution anymore. Was it the Emergency Powers Act, which took place in like 1933 or something, or right around World War II, where they suspended the Constitution? And I think our Constitution has been suspended, and that's what's happened, is our Constitution is suspended, and for some reason the politicians won't talk about that. And that's why you can't really impeach the president. because we're under a state of emergency, and we have been for quite some time. At least I've heard people say that, and that seems to make logical sense to me. Have your research ever taken you down that path, or?
You're really you're going down a very hot trail, if you will. Okay, and please appreciate that I've watched with a critical mind, with an educated mind. I've watched presidents since Dwight D. Eisenhower. And I'm 68 years old, so I'm no spring chicken. Although you don't want to ride a bicycle with me or go swimming, because I'll outswim you, outbike you, and outrun you. And I'll certainly outski you on a powder slope, or even climb a 13,000 footer in the middle of winter at 25 below.
Wow.
Anyway, that's because I've maintained a very good physical fitness level my whole life, because I love the physical outdoors and the challenges that go with it. But there's no question, in my 68 years, and with a critical mind, and as a messenger, and as also an observer, we really have, with the American people, have only averaged 50% of us voting in national elections, and around 10% of us voting in local elections for the last 45 years that I've seen it going on. And so you see that what wins an election is not what you're saying. It's the advertisements that tell everybody what you're saying. And it's all by advertising, and it has nothing to do with substance and teleprompters, and nothing's really being dealt with. It's all almost politically correct, or I'm gonna bring more jobs, and I'm gonna do this and that, and everybody votes for their favorite Republican or Democrat or whatever, and nothing gets done. I think the Congress gets a 9% approval rating right now, and you have to wonder what that 9% is thinking, if they think it's doing a great job. But 95% of the incumbents get voted back in. And so, yes, big money controls the United States right now. The military-industrial complex absolutely started the Iraq War through George Bush. And I'm an ex-Army guy, so I know what's going on. And the Vietnam War was completely perpetrated on the American people by LBJ, because Barry Goldwater was a hawk, and everybody voted not a hawk, which was LBJ after JFK died. And so you sit there, and he jumped it up. And of course, Westmoreland fed us all this baloney about the troop movements and the troop this, that, and the next thing. It was all a bunch of paper mache baloney. And 58,000 kids got killed. And I'm thankful I didn't get killed. 350,000 got wounded. And what ran that war was the military-industrial complex, which is then part of the munitions and the bankers who are making the money on it. And certainly the textiles and the food people and all that goes with that to support the war. And those are all big corporations. Well, nowadays, those same corporations literally can throw elections, and they can elect or de-elect just about anybody they want, depending how much money they want to put into it. And so essentially we're getting ruled by an oligarchy right now. And that's why nothing's getting done. That's why this president hasn't really made this country move forward in race relations. He hasn't gotten jobs for African Americans. He hasn't stopped the insourcing and the outsourcing and the offshoring of jobs. If you go into Target, or you go into Lowe's, or you go into Home Depot, over 90% of all the products are made in China, or they're made in some other third world country. And then here we've got, again, 14 million unemployed and 7 million underemployed. That's well over 20 million Americans that can't get make a decent living, pay for a house, and yet they're making a lot of money in China and all these other areas that are doing all the, creating drill bits and drills and lawnmowers, and even the American Flyer, which was the all-American little steel wagon that I pulled as a little toddler, that's now made in China. And so has the president, the Congress stopped any of that? Nope, it sure hasn't. So yeah, we're not so much in a constitutional republic anymore. But then again, the American people are the ones that let it happen, because they simply don't show up at the polls.
In China, they chain their children to posts while the parents go in and work in the factories, don't they? It's
pretty sickening. I got to tell you, I've traveled all over China, and I'll give you an example. The air pollution over there is so bad that the fish cannot be caught in the ocean, in the rivers, and they can't be caught in the lakes anymore because of so much acid rain that's got so many chemicals in it. And the Yangtze River, which I've sailed on a junket, is an open sewer. It's an open sewer. It has feces and urine for hundreds, if not thousands, of cities that line it, and all of the industrial waste that's pumped into it. It has a 20,000 square mile dead zone out at the mouth of the Yangtze River, and of course that dead zone poisons all the rest of the oceans, because everything in the final toilet, the oceans, it permeates every other ocean, and the same thing with the Ganges, which have also been on. And so China is just a mess. And it's not going to end well for the Chinese, especially now that they are all becoming just like Americans, a car in every garage. And that means that more carbon footprint and more oil being burned faster. As I said, 98 million barrels of oil per day by China alone in the next, 15, 16 years. So, China's in a lot of trouble. And it's sad that we're not employing our own people in this country, because we could make the same drill bits and drills and American Flyer wagons and the Maytag washers and so forth. But these big money men at the top are driving the middle class out of existence and creating a new, literally middle poor class. And the American people are just watching it happen. And certainly everybody that they elect into the Senate and the House are part and parcel of that whole mess called the new oligarchy, if you will.
I remember reading in your book that in some of these countries that when they use the toilet, their sewer system cannot handle toilet paper, so they have to kind of take the used toilet paper and throw it in a trash can or something, and they just leave the used toilet paper there. That's just unbelievable. It's just horrible. It's just filthy.
Yeah, and you better get used to it when you do that. When you go to the bathroom in places like Mexico. In fact, I think in Mexico City right now, with I think around 22 to 24 million people, it's one of the largest cities in the world. They turn the water off now because they simply don't have water from around 7 or 8 o'clock at night till 6 the next morning. Mexico City is one of the most air polluted cities in the world. Cancers for the children. The toxins for the fetuses of all the pregnant women, air pollution. For those of you who haven't seen it, I've written a 20-part series on overpopulation in America. If you want to see that, I actually can just kick it out to you. It has 4 colored pictures to each one of them. And in that series, I show you all of the bottom ramifications of overpopulation that you don't see every day. One of the chapters was about the roadkill. We kill 1 million vertebrate creatures every single day of the year. 1 million. We roll over them, or we fly through them. We kill off 1 million. In fact, it's around 400 million. The scientists tell us. And can you imagine what's going to happen when we have another 138 million people with all those cars and airplanes flying through the air? We're going to kill 500, 600 million vertebrate creatures off, and that could be a dove, it could be a robin, it could be a goose, it could be a deer, it could be a grizzly bear, it could be a brown bear, a black bear, of course, snakes of all kinds, hawks and eagles of all kinds, coyotes, roadrunners, you name it. That's just an ancillary aspect of overpopulation. Talk about polluting our rivers. I go into that and how badly that's happening. I talk about, of course, species extinction. I talk about groundwater contamination. I talk about all the cows and the pigs that are crapping, into the groundwater that's poisoning the groundwater. And once you poison the groundwater, you got problems. And so that whole 20-part series is I can send it to you. Just give me an email and I'll shoot it to you. And that's part of that book too. And the pictures alone should scare the pants off you. Anybody that's seen, I've been a scuba diver for 50 years. I've seen the oceans turn to plastic. And if anybody's seen the 100 million ton, folks, 100 million tons of plastic floating out 1,000 miles off San Francisco right now from all of you and everyone else who's thrown their plastic bottles or their styrofoam or whatever, you've created 100 million ton, the size of Texas, plastic garbage patch between these two gyres out in the Pacific Ocean. But there's 5 gyres worldwide, and there's all those Pacific garbage patches are all over the doggone planet right now. On average, 46,000 pieces of plastic floating on every square mile of oceans around the world. If that doesn't make you sick, I don't know what will.
I remember in your book, I think you said 8,000 containers of plastic go into the ocean. Is it every year?
It's 2.5 million every hour.
What?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I talked in another interview, and they absolutely were incredulous. But I finally found the citation for it, and I could look it up again because it's been about 6 months to a year. But from all the, you got to understand, there's 7.3 billion humans on the planet, and they're all drinking out of those little Vina, water bottles. Right. Most of your third world has to drink, plastic water bottles because there's so much pollution. I mean, India and China, Bangladesh, all the water systems are just god awful polluted, and so everybody's using plastic. Just Google plastic trash on the internet, and you just can't believe the rivers of plastic flowing out into the oceans. And so, yes, you look it up, just Google it. And my last citation for that was 2.5 million plastic containers are tossed into the oceans every hour, 24/7, by 7.3 billion human beings who simply don't care or aren't aware of what they're doing and where the final toilet is for that plastic that they toss.
Listen, Frosty, if you want to post a link to your video in the chat box here, I will go ahead and post it in the Revolution Radio chat room for all our listeners.
Okay, yeah, well, give me an email and I'll shoot you the series. And the series is very colorful and it's very sobering, absolutely. And I do have video aspects to that series also, so you can see it right there before your eyes on a video. So yeah, I would love to do that, and I'd love to see this little 20-part series, which is for free. I put it out there. You'll be very educated to what we have done to our country, and that's just here in the United States. I should do an international overpopulation series like that, and it would be even scarier because there are no pollution controls in China or in India or in Bangladesh or Mexico or South America. I mean, Brazil dumps trillions of gallons of sewage into the ocean there, because I've been all through South America. They toss their plastic and their garbage and their sewage. In fact, all the oceans for 30 miles up and down from Rio de Janeiro, it says Peligro, because the water is all brown and there's nothing but sewage. It's got nothing but sewage floating around in the waves as they come crashing into the shore, and the water's all brown. It's quite horrible.
Gosh, that's astounding.
Oh, yeah.
Also in your book, you talked about the overfishing in the Pacific Ocean, and you mentioned that these fishing boats, they put out these lines, yep, and they can stretch for like, I think you said 60 miles, and they may have 10,000 hooks.
That's right. They're ganglion hooks. Right.
Go ahead, tell us about that. That's crazy.
Yes, for those of you who want to check this out, go to One Earth by Julia Whitty, Whitty. I did the research on her research. Please understand that I am an investigative journalist. I research all the finest information from all the top researchers, and then I glean all of that and I get the best information. And so, yes, what they have is these giant drift nets, 30, 40, 50, 60 miles long, and they go and they just surround giant gobs of the floor of the fishing banks off of North America, South America, right into, off of all the different continents. The Chinese are doing it. And they have these hooks, the ganglion hooks, and they hook sharks, they hook tuna, they hook turtles, they hook, salmon. They hook all the different creatures. Even
birds get.
Oh, birds! Yeah, that's right. And so what happens when these things get snagged? They can't release them because they're down so deep, and they can't dive and release them. they then cut them loose. And so on the oceans of the world right now, you have these giant killing factories that, and you can go again, look up drift net trash in the Pacific or the Atlantic on the Google, on the internet, and you'll see so many gas. They kill whales because whales get caught up in this stuff and they can't unhook their teeth like a sperm whale, or they can't get their flukes undone, so they drown. Literally millions of dolphins drown because they get caught up in these ganglion hooks and these drift nets. And as a matter of fact, I've got one. It's called Midway Island. It's a 4-minute video, and it's in part 16 of my series. And you watch this thing. It's only like 5 minutes long, and you see how we're killing all of the albatross, the wave albatross, which are now coming in onto extinction. And I've seen these things on the Galapagos Islands. They are a magnificent bird, but we've got so many plastic bottle caps and plastic toothbrushes and all this crap floating and in the oceans and on the waves that the birds think it's food, and then they eat it, and of course it stuffs up their gullets, and then they die. And this guy has gone around the Midway Island, 2,000 miles into the Pacific, and he shows where all these birds are dying because of all the plastic bottle caps that everybody carelessly throws into the river or into the ocean or whatever, and then it finally ends up inside the gullet of these poor birds and whales, dolphins. I mean, we're killing off unbelievable millions of other creatures into the oceans because of the plague of plastic.
Do you think we're insane? What's wrong with us?
Well, the human race, I've said this for many years. God's worst mistake was creating humans, because there's never been another species as destructive to everybody else on the planet, and we take no responsibility for our destructiveness. And so, can you think of any other species that has killed off not only itself? I mean, like right now, there's 18 million humans starved to death every year. Well, the rest of the country, hell, the United States spends $9 billion a year just to lose weight.
Right.
But yeah, there's 10 million children starved to death every year on the planet, and humans don't do anything about that. Another 8 million adults starve to death and die of starvation on the planet. That's 18 million. 18 million. And you can look that up. Time magazine came out with that 8 million figure for adults. You can go on the NPR. You can go on the United Nations starvation. Look it up on Google. 10 million children die of starvation every year, or starvation-related diseases. And of course, those numbers are going to grow as we keep adding 1 billion humans every 12 years. So, Mark, yeah, it's hard to grasp all this stuff. So I hope to keep bringing it down to the level of the United States. We've got to do something. We've got to do it now so that we lead the rest of the world toward a stable population, not only in the United States, but worldwide, or we're all going to be going down together with this mess.
And it's possible that we may reach 14 billion people by the end of this century. Is that true?
Got it. That's right. Again, figure this. 57 million people, 7.3 billion on the planet. 57 million humans die every year of all causes. Not only are the 57 million people replaced with 57 million new babies, human babies, the human race then adds another 80 million beyond that. Do the math. 80 million times 12 gives you 1 billion more people every 12 years. Take that out to the end of the century. It's going to be more than interesting to see how much further this thing goes. But my suspicion is when oil runs out, and it start, Chris Steiner did it for Forbes magazine. He wrote a book. You can get it on the internet. You can get it for an ebook if you want. I got the whole copy of it. Gasoline's going to hit $20 a gallon, probably in the lifetime of anybody born today, or certainly anybody that's 20 years old. And so when gasoline, and the reason it's going to go to $20 a gallon, when I was a kid, it was at $19.9. I used to fill my Volkswagen up for $2. And now, of course, gasoline is $3, $4. It's been $3 to $4 a gallon. It's been going down lately, but I guarantee you it's going to go back up. and it's going to go up to 5, and then 10, and then 12, and 15, and 20. And, trade relate. I mean, Egypt right now gets about 80% of its food from Canada and from the U.S. and from Australia. But at some point, balance of trade, they won't be able to pay, and the farmers won't be able to, pay for $20 a gallon for gasoline. So those people that are depending on us, and realize this, Egypt with about 80 million people in Egypt right now, they're expecting another 40 million here by mid-century. They don't have a plan, and they don't have birth control, and so they're going to be in big trouble. So you can see as I paint this picture for you with facts, these are facts I'm bringing to you, not myth and not just pulled out of the air. These are facts. These are numbers that are going to happen unless we change course. Then you can see the kind of consequences that are going to fall on a whole bunch of folks around the globe.
You sent me, in one of the email things that you sent me a photograph, and I think it was from Egypt. Mm-hmm. And it was a dirt road that seemed to stretch for quite some distance off into the distance. And on the whole side of that dirt road was just a line of garbage that seemed like it went on for miles. Was that Egypt?
No, that wasn't Egypt. Actually, there are many places in the world where there's just garbage. Actually, if you go to Greece, the Greeks throw their garbage everywhere. I've ridden my bicycle from Corfu, Patras, all the way through the Oracle of Delphi, along the Mediterranean, and all the way into Athens. And you cannot believe all the trash that's thrown in. They make any turn off any place a garbage pit in Greece. Every river canyon, every river valley, every ravine, just trash, garbage, filth, every kind of cars tossed into the Mediterranean. It's unbelievable.
Is it a cultural thing? Why are they that way?
It's a cultural thing, but that cultural thing is pretty much all third world. You go into any third world. If you even come into the United States, go down any highway in the United States. In fact, if you go into, I bicycled the whole length of California. I did the whole West Coast this summer. And you just can't believe all the bottles, cans, and couches and chairs and trash and soiled baby diapers tossed along the roads just at will by all of the people that are living in California, because it's becoming a cultural thing. And you have to understand that different cultures have different world views, and trash to a third world person, whether it's a stick or it's paper or it's a baby diaper, it doesn't connote to them it's trash. Third world people are just so used to throwing everything because it was all organic at one time. Now that it's plastic, and now that it's baby diaper, and now that it's steel, or now that it's whatever it is, it's still to them the same thing that they've had in their culture since the dawn of time. But now it's dangerous because it's a baby diaper, and it's soiled, and it's disease ridden, and it's whatever. And then the plastic goes into the water systems, etc. And that's happening all over the world.
So we're dealing with a cultural issue here too, as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cultural illiteracy, kind of a combination: illiteracy, cultural illiteracy. Yeah.
I remember, I think it was in one of the emails you sent me that showed in Mumbai, India, right next to the airport, this giant slum is filled with all kinds of trash and filth. Horrible.
Yep, that's exactly right, and that's India. India. In fact, I met this summer, I meet a lot of cyclists that are world touring cyclists, just like yours truly. And this guy's name is Woogi, W-O-O-G-I, Shin, S-H-I-N. And you can get him on Facebook. I befriended him. We're really good friends now. He's from Korea. And he's on a year trip around, or 2-year trip around the world. And he speaks very good English. He's got a brilliant smile. He's a great kid. He's probably 25 years old. And I don't know how he got all the money to be a world traveler on a bicycle, but he has it. He is. And he went through India too. And, I went through India years ago. And now India is another, my God, it's got several hundred millions of more people, because India grows by 11 million every year net gain. And then he says, Frosty, my friend, he says, I love China, but much pollution. And he says, and India is a mess. No can help.
No can help.
Yeah. India is beyond the point of solving any of its problems. When you add 11 million every year net gain, and they're going to overcome China. They're going to hit about 1.55 to 1.6 billion inside of the next 35 years. I think we're going to see massive cholera outbreaks. I think we're going to see massive water shortages and starvation levels in India that they're going to be just horrific. But I think the diseases are probably going to come in and just do a number, but then you're going to see the consequences of water shortages. So India and China and Bangladesh, I don't know if anyone got this last time, but Bangladesh, I'll give this as a repeat. Bangladesh has 157 million people inside a landmass less than the size of Iowa. And they're expected to add another 40, 50 million people. And so, dear listener, can you imagine sticking half of the U.S. population, into Iowa? And you think that's quality of life? Do you think that's standard of living? Do you think that's anything to do with environmental balance? Do you think that has anything to do with sanity? And of course, the answer is there's no sanity at all. But again, when illiteracy drives the fecundity rates, then there's no common sense, there's no rational thinking, there's no nothing. It's just simply a free-for-all. And the only thing that happens is just more babies and then more human suffering. And that's the same path we're on right now. We just don't realize we're on it. And you're seeing it explode as the United States is about to add 138 million more people in the next 35 years.
That's the one statistic that really sticks with me is the Bangladesh statistic with 157 million people. Mm-hmm. Ohio is about the size of Iowa, roughly, and we have 11.5 million people, and I think we're overpopulated. I cannot even imagine 157 million people.
Yeah, well, please realize this. When I was going through Asia in '84, I was a happy-go-lucky kid. I mean, I'm on my bicycle, and please understand this. As serious as I am on the radio here, I go dancing on Saturday nights. I go skiing on the weekends. I just pedaled up the Pikes. I pedaled to the top of Mount Evans on November the 1st. It is 14,264 feet, and two other senior citizens that talked me into it. We pulled our mountain bikes over the 4-foot snow drifts. And after 5 hours of pedaling, 10 below zero, 35-mile-an-hour winds, yours truly got to the top, the only three guys in all of North America to reach the top of a 14,000-foot peak on November the 1st. I'm telling you, this was a world record.
Wow.
And so I have a lot of fun. I love life. I get a kick out of it. And I'm going through China, and I'm going, man, boy, these people are packed in like sardines. And then I got over, but at least there was not so much poverty. Everybody was on the farm. All of them got fed. But they were just living very lean lives. No one ever left their little village. Now you'll see more Chinese all over the world. But into India, oh my God, I just went, there's a problem here. And since that time, if you start looking at Frosty Wooldridge on the internet, you will see I started writing articles on overpopulation way back then. And for the last 15 years, I've tried to get on Meet the Press and Face the Nation and Robert Siegel on NPR and Talk of the Nation. I've tried to get Leslie Stahl, Simon, Steve Croft, Anderson Cooper, David Muir. I've tried to say, hey, do an interview with me. And if you don't want to do it with me, I've got 35 other experts that know just as much as I do. And let's get the discussion going. And I have gotten absolutely zero response from any of them for the last 15 years. Charlie Rose, same thing. It's exasperating that everyone that I have come in contact at the highest and lowest levels, I've sent commentaries, highly articulate, exceptionally well-written commentaries and columns, into USA Today Forum. They won't publish. New York Times, Washington Post, Washington Times, LA Times. You'd think the LA Times would want somebody like me to say, hey, we got to deal with this, folks. We're in the middle of a nightmare here in Los Angeles. But Los Angeles does everything it can to hide the immigration crisis, hide the population issue. They just keep reporting on the consequences, but they never deal with the cause of them. So you can see how exasperating it is.
Sure, sure. Now, did you say, maybe it's in your book, that 4 million people are born on the street and die on the street in India? Is it every year?
Yes, every year. And as a matter of fact, that number is well over 10 million. I actually I attended Arun Gandhi, who's still alive. I attended a lecture by Arun Gandhi, who's the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. And very articulate, and obviously, Mahatma Gandhi, of course, you all know, was the man who kicked, the Great Britain out of India, and he walked to the sea, and he went on starvation, benches and so forth, and he's the man who literally got Great Britain kicked out of India, and India became its own independent state. And anyway, his son, his grandson. Arun Gandhi, A-R-U-N, gave this presentation, and he said that India is such a mess. At the time, he said 4 million, this was over 10 years ago, 4 million Indians are born on the streets, live on the streets, and die on the streets without ever having a bath, washed their hands, or used a toilet. And as a matter of fact, literally hundreds of millions of Indians defecate on the land every day in India because there are no septic systems, there's no sewer systems, there's no toilets. They use literally defecate on the land, in the woods, and every place else. And I can tell you, I do the same thing. I did the same thing. You couldn't get a toilet. And so the one thing you notice when you get into the cities of India, just the stench of stink. And they're, as I say, they're growing by 11 million net gain every year, so they can't keep up to it. They can't get it. They can't make enough toilets. They can't make enough septic systems. They can't get sewer systems. That's why the Ganges River is just a giant sewer pipe with a 20,000 square mile dead zone at the mouth of it. So yeah. Anyway, the 4 million. That's the small number. It's up into the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions.
I was going to bring up Dr. Otis Graham. He was one of the experts in this whole population field, correct?
Yes, he is. He's a brilliant. And I met Otis Graham, and this quote I think is very important for every person listening tonight. He wrote "Unguarded Gates," and the guy is funny and he's brilliant. And he's from Stanford, and he said, and I quote, "Most Western elites continue urging the wealthy West not to stem the migrant tide that adds 80 million net gain annually to the planet, but to absorb our global brothers and sisters until their horrid ordeal has been endured and shared by all. 10 billion humans packed onto an ecologically devastated planet," unquote. That should go down as the #1 quote in the 21st century in America. And then, of course, acted upon to stop this.
Unfortunately, I think we may be heading there.
Oh, yeah, we are.
I just, for some reason, we're going to keep trying definitely to help wake the world up. But I do get a feeling if we don't start taking some real action really quick, that's the future we're going to have. What we're going to see are these hyper cities with 15, 20 million people and horrible slums and just chaos.
That's correct. And that's what I've seen in my world travels. And once it gets to that, once this next 100, and dear listener, I'll give you another way that our country's going to be, our civilization is going to be fractured and fragmented. We're on course to add 100 million immigrants legally to this country in the next 30 years. And they come from approximately out of 180, 85 countries around the world right now, give or take a revolution. About 140 of these countries are giving us their poorest people, immigrants. And what we're importing is 140 different worldviews. Mm-hmm. And I want you to understand this. Worldview is what caused the faltering or the failure of the countries that are exporting all these people. And so what we're importing are people who have a failed worldview, a very much different worldview, a failed culture that didn't sustain them in their own country, and a lot of times very incompatible religions. For those of you who know anything about the religion of Islam, it is diametrically opposed to anything American. It is absolutely, totally against women's rights of any kind. It's against free speech. It's against free choice. It's against free religious choice. It's against women's rights totally. And it has a lot of other angry aspects to it. And we have 7 million of them in this country right now, already making pretty massive and nasty impact on our ethos. And if you keep bringing all of these failed world views into this country, pretty soon they all want what they want, and most ethnic groups always vie for dominance. If you look at Vancouver, Canada right now, the Chinese are literally taking over Vancouver. It's no longer a Canadian city. It's becoming a Chinese city. If you look at Detroit, Michigan, it's becoming a caliphate essentially for Islam. And so what we're going to do within the next 30 years is fragment and fracture the ethos of our country to such a degree that we will be pulling in so many directions as everybody votes for their favorite worldview or their favorite religion. And if you see places like Lebanon, and you see the violence in Lebanon, and you see all these other multiculturalized cities, now Sweden is getting, just had fire bombs last week in Sweden. Norway is ready to blow up. There are two different cities in London, England. Now there's the Islamic side of London, England, and the British side. And they've none of, well, the Muslims go over into the British side, but the British don't go over into the Islamic side. Paris, France, the same way. There's 70 no-go zones where French do not go into these no-go zones because they are controlled totally by Sharia law and by Muslims. And so we're doing the exact same thing. And I question, and I did a 23-part series on Muslims in America. And it's pretty sobering because it's a very aggressive religion economic system, and it's diametrically opposed to the American ethos and to the U.S. Constitution. So we're going to be battling. In fact, I made this quote the last time, but I think it bears repeating, and I'll give it to you again for those of you who haven't heard it. This is by James Waltz, the former Associate General Counsel of the United States Immigration and Naturalization Service, which is INS, which is now, of course, ICE. I quote, "Immigrants devoted to their own cultures and religions are not influenced by the secular, politically correct facade that dominates academia, news media, entertainment, education, religious, and political thinking today," he said. "These immigrants claim the right not to assimilate. And the day is coming when the question will be, how can the United States regulate the defiantly unassimilated cultures, religions, and mores of foreign lands? Such immigrants say their traditions trump the U.S. legal system. Balkanization of the United States has begun." Unquote. I can tell you this, I've seen a lot of conflict around the world, and one thing I have really noticed is that cultures don't mix. They become violent with one another. And that ends up usually, as you see in places like Stockholm, Sweden right now, with all the fire bombings and so forth. Also the Somalians that are literally, there's about almost 100,000 Somalians now in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And you're now seeing a really strong push for Islam schools and Arabic and Sharia law. I have a piece right here. This was in USA Today, November 26th. Anger and resentment over diversity in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Eden Prairie, Minnesota was literally all Scandinavian, literally 20 years ago, and now they're all moving out, and it's being taken over by Somali refugees, and they're literally all on welfare, and they've just literally, where they're coming in, they just take over the schools. They are offended at Christmas. They're offended having anything to do with Easter. They're offended at Halloween. So that's already, and this is a big piece. It was written by Greg Topo and Paul Overberg. And if you want to look it up, USA Today, November 26 through 28, 2014, we're going to have more confrontations like that as the numbers grow of these different ethnic groups and their languages and their worldviews. And to me, it's very frightening because I've seen the backside of that, and the backside of it is not very pretty, Mark.
Frosty, we are about out of time. We've got 1 minute left. Please tell people again about your website, your book, everything.
Okay, yes. My website, my fun website is howtolivaalifeofadventure.com. Howtolivaalifeofadventure.com. I write for newswithviews.com. If you're a conservative, I write for freedomsphoenix.com. If you're a libertarian, I write for opednews.com. If you're a liberal, I want to educate everybody. If you're an independent, I write for beforeitsnews.com. Please join capsweb.org, capsweb.org. It's for free. Make your voice heard. Numbersusa.org. Write those faxes and phone calls to stop any kind of amnesty and defund this amnesty that the Barack Obama has perpetrated and literally relinquished the U.S. Constitution. And FAIR, FAIRUS.org. And beyond that, God bless all of us. This is going to be a battle for our country. I hope you join it. And Mark, thank you, and Merry Christmas to everyone listening tonight. And may we save our country from what's going to happen in the future if we keep sitting around picking our noses.
Where did you say there are 100,000 Somalis at?
Minneapolis, St. Paul. I think it's around 85, 90,000 at this point, and they keep chain migrating. And you have to understand, Somalians are Muslim bush people who have no skills, have no understanding of the dynamics of a first world country. They're virtually riding the welfare rolls. They get Section 8 housing and food stamps, and they get paid all this money. And unfortunately, several church groups are just literally pouring them into this country to dump them on some city. I guess there's about 10,000 up in Cheyenne, Wyoming right now, and they're absolutely driving everybody crazy because these people can't function. They have nothing in common with us. They have no religion in common with us. They have no language in common. They have no culture in common. They have no worldview in common. And therefore, they're just simply outcasts in this country. And that's the way they stay. They never assimilate into the host country. That's been proven all over the West now. Same in Canada, same in Europe, and certainly the same in Australia. So pretty serious stuff. It's what's happening with this massive Islamic, Somalian, Congo, Sudanese, Ethiopians that are being imported into this country. They're just out of water and not part of this country.
Thanks so much, Frosty. Great show.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure, sir.
Good night.
Good night.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Hi, this is Bo.
And this is Rocco.
And the Bo and Rocco Show is here to offer insight into legal and lawful remedies. Our goal is to remain free and help others remain free in an ever-increasing police-like state. With the help of our guests, we try to answer questions such as what went wrong and what can we do about it.
So tune into Revolution Radio at www.freedomslips.com Wednesday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to listen to the Bo and Rocco Show.
You don't need to expect us.
We're already here.
Revolution Radio. Every Tuesday evening on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, we present our goddess spiritual warrior, Kathy Bilski.
I command. I call to